Let me tell you how the AI lie spreads. One executive says it on a stage, 10 CEOs repeat it in boardrooms, and suddenly it becomes common knowledge. Let's talk about why that is and how you can deal with the AI lies that are out there now. So welcome to Dave Linthicum is Not AI. I'm Dave, an AI SME and an AI skeptic, looking at AI with a balanced perspective. Let's get started. So first, I apologize for my nasally twang. I'm just getting over a cold and I'm not even hearing what I'm saying. So hopefully it's coming out all right. But also want to thank you guys for the fact of the matter is I just crossed over 100,000 subscribers a few weeks back. Thanks to you, everybody who believed in this channel and really kind of, adopted the message that we should be looking at AI with a skeptical view, looking at the pragmatic use of the technology, what it does and what it doesn't do. So please make sure, if you're not subscribed, to subscribe. Make sure to like the videos. Also share this with a friend or a colleague. Let them know that we're telling the truth over here. I think that's important. So lots of instances where some AI predictions turned out to be not so true. I think sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, but lots of confusing stuff out there. For example, Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, forecasted that by 2026, AI would write all code and allow a single person with $100 to $1,000 to replicate full engineering teams, implying massive developer displacement. And obviously, people took that as gospel. That shook up a lot of folks, including people who are developers. Why did I spend time learning to code if suddenly AI is going to replace me? And many companies even made rash actions. They started to outplace people because they figured that AI was going to provide efficiencies and which will allow them to do more things with fewer humans. So 2026, something different. AI replacement flopped into $61 billion of technical debt crisis. Companies rehired laid off developers as AI proved inadequate for complex work, and they shifted focus to augmentation. So as we mentioned here on this channel many times, AI can automate tasks, typically can't replace humans. Anybody who's been a software engineer understands that a good part of that job is going to take creativity and innovation, which AI has trouble replicating. It can replicate patterns, in other words, how we code and, even look at some of the best practices in coding, things like that. But getting to an efficient state, into the architecture strategy for how you build and deploy these systems is something it can't do. And they found that out pretty quickly and are still finding it out today. I'm getting a call once a week from some company that laid off most of their engineering staff, and they find they can't replicate them with AI. It was promised by their technology providers, and now they're trying to get those people back, are trying to figure out some other options. And next, Jensen Huang, he's the Nvidia CEO, obviously a mover and shaker, high flyer in the market. Nvidia's doing great. He denied an AI bubble, predicting explosive infrastructure growth where AI would power trillion-dollar economies and automate vast job seekers like coding and analysis. Outcome much different. So unscalable power grids, stalled data center booms, bubble fears mounted with stock corrections as AI ROI lagged despite the hype. No widespread job apocalypse ever materialized, or of course little mini layoffs that were, hit the reset button that ended up costing the companies many times more than they thought they were going to save. So he's kind of wrong about that. And you got to remember, Jensen, just like Sam Altman, they're going to be cheerleaders for their companies. That's what they do. I've been a CEO before. You're a cheerleader for the company and cheerleader for the technology and cheerleader for the vision that you're trying to promote, which is going to drive sales in your company. So, these guys are not going to be objective third parties. These guys are going to be biased individuals, but people listen to these individuals and they take it as the gospel truth and they start moving forward with it as something that's going to be fact. In many cases, they hear them, repeat them, and many of the leaders, or secondary consulting firm presidents, other CEOs of different companies, follow their lead and end up making huge mistakes because their lead becomes something that wasn't materially true. And finally, Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, he championed AI as a systemic to all life aspects, fueling layoffs and 10,000 K cuts with the promises of AI-driven efficiency replacing human roles across Azure and Copilot. Outcome much different. They faced backlash and had to rehire talent amid integration failures. Enterprise adoption stalled at 6%, with executives admitting overhyped technical debt piled up and they had to go fix it. And so another thing where they got way out over their skis, AI is this, AI is just amazing stuff. when they probably knew full well that AI wasn't going to live up to these capabilities. But again, they're being salespeople for the companies. The companies are going to be dependent on AI. They're selling AI. Microsoft, Nvidia, OpenAI are all in the market. And so they're promoting the concept, promoting the vision. Unfortunately, they got a lot of that stuff wrong. Whether they did it on purpose or not, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. These are smart people. But many people believe them and move forward with those strategies. I talked to a lot of people that believe in their heart of hearts that this messaging that they got in 2022 and 2023 around the revolutionary nature of AI and took to heart and made decisions around it were absolutely true, only in 2026 to find out it's not true. So organizations that bet big on AI by slashing jobs, over 64,000 tech layoffs in 2025 alone, often cited as AI optimization, hear that term a lot, hit reset buttons fast. Many apologize publicly as AI underdelivered on promises, proving premature cuts created chaos, not efficiency. So this isn't evolution. It's hype-fueled blunder exposing the gap between vendor promises and real-world performance. This kind of bothers me because people got hurt. In other words, people were laid off their job. And so there were, put their future in jeopardy and put their income in jeopardy. And they support families and pay mortgages and all that kind of stuff because companies made dumb decisions. And companies made decisions based on belief in somebody else's message that they took to heart, not understanding or doing some research behind what would actually happen. And so many of these companies actually hurt themselves to the point they're still recovering today because they got way out over their skis in terms of the value of AI and how AI is going to affect their business, figure out how they automate various systems, certainly automate coding, and technology transformation. Aspects of that are going to be true. Very small, narrow aspects of that are going to be a reality, but the majority of it turned out to be crap. So the most culpable in this little liar chain are execs at OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, and AWS. I think they fully grasp the realities of AI and the limitations of AI. Very smart people at those companies. I talk to them all the time, just kind of taken back, how much they know. But they cheered anyway, because again, I think it's their job. If you're the CEO of a company or you work for a company, you need to be enthusiastic about not only the technology, but the market that the technology is going to be growing in. And so people talked about how the AI technology was going to be revolutionary and is going to take everything to the next level. And their revenue streams, depend on it. So I don't blame them for this because I think that's what happens in the due course of business. Where I get a little frustrated is the people who took what they said as gospel, others without asking their own questions. And in many cases, certainly back in 2023 and 2024 and 2025, I ended up being the designated buzzkill because I would go into these meetings where they were talking about some vision that was provided by some AI executive around everything was going, and I would have to normalize that vision with reality. And everybody would just look at me like, "Oh, come on, man, you're screwing up our buzz." But that's the way it is. I mean, you can't change the laws of technology just because you believe something to be true. And I think that people are realizing that now. But a few years ago, that wasn't the case because there were so many people around hyping the technology. So hype sustains valuations, even as insiders bet against their own successes. So it still is going to go on today. It's not going to stop. Even though we have concrete truth that many of the predictions made a few years ago did not come true. In fact, many of them backfired. You're still going to see these predictions made today. In other words, it's going to be, we know that didn't work, but this will work. This new agentic-based approach will work. We didn't have that in place a couple of years ago. Now we do. So let's go ahead and try this. And we'll eventually get to the vision that we think we're going to get to. It's going to be a slow evolution over time. It's not going to be these big revolutions where we're going to start, hemorrhaging people, out of these companies. It's going to take a long time for that stuff to take on, and people need to understand that. So the next level down in the liar chain would be the echo chamber repeaters who are out there. And these are less intentional. And typically I think they're well-intentioned people, but equally dangerous. CEOs, of consulting firms, car manufacturers, retail giants and device makers, parrot the same narratives as the AI technology providers. A company future hinges on AI success, so they amplify without scrutiny, creating a chain of information from vendors to end users. And things will happen like the car manufacturers will decide that they're going to make AI innate to their vehicles. And I have a video on that coming around, or I think it's dropped already. And made a huge mistake because they overestimated the consumer's need or want to leverage these features, but they got all in because of many of the things that they heard from the AI tech providers. And the fact of the matter is it was out in the zeitgeist that AI was going to change the future and they wanted to get on board, but made huge mistakes. I don't think they were lying per se, because I think they didn't know any better. But again, repeating narratives that somebody else is creating, you need to do some due diligence on that to figure out what's a reality and what's not. In many cases, it was too much wishful thinking. Again, got way out over their skis and ended up costing them, many billions of dollars. So keep in mind that if sounds too good to be true or doesn't add up, it probably is. I spotted the overreach early, claims ignored AI's core flaws, pushed to bias players, with skin in the game. In other words, they're going to be successful if whatever vision they're pushing, comes true. So don't buy vendor evangelism blindly, questioning motives, especially when stock prices balloon on unproven tech. So what's different about the AI movement is that there was a lot of blind faith that people took it upon themselves. And I think many people had an emotional reaction when they used generative AI for the first time. Very cool technology, very useful, and say, wow, this is something that's a game changer. We can take everything to the next level. And it does have the potential of doing aspects of that, but just painted too much untruth on top of the truth and ended up making expectations and making predictions that had no way of coming true. And, in 2026, 2027 is going to be the year of reckoning when you figure out what this technology can actually do. And I think we're doing that right now, and start getting into more of a productive mode in figuring out how we're going to apply this technology to business. But unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of mistakes before that's going to happen in every aspect of the economy. I think these mistakes are going on today. I hear about them every week, and they're going to continue for some time as people believe the hype, believe the information they're hearing out there, where much of it is going to be untrue. So keep in mind that AI isn't worthless. You have to discern the truth from the hype. If it excels at AI can excel, for example, at narrow tasks like spotting syntax errors or flagging issues, that humans miss. They're very good at the detail stuff, but they flop at, full code generation or systemic overhauls of various systems. So focus on the gains without swallowing the replacement myth. I think that's the key phrase here. AI, again, very good at automating tasks. I can't imagine a day without using AI to automate many of the things that I do, even creating these videos. But at the end of the day, it's not me. And you still have to have the innovation and creativity that comes from the human person that's in there, whether you're building software or writing books or whatever, or else you're not going to get to the same quality. You're just going to repeat patterns that it already understands. It's already understood via training data. And so that limitation is typically always going to be there. People talk about, well, we're going to get to AGI at some point, where it's going to have human intelligence, creative and innovative capabilities. Maybe. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, based on what I know about AI and really kind of the goals and objectives of what AGI is supposed to be. I think we're going to have AI that people will claim is AGI, but it's not necessarily going to be AGI and not something that can replace humans. Kind of keep that in mind. I'm on Team Human. So finally, brace for the AI bubble to burst. I don't think it's going to be Armageddon like everybody is, worried about out there, where markets, basically just collapse and 401ks go to, close to zero, things like that, things like we saw in 2008. And certainly the dot-com bubble collapse in the late 90s. So AI stocks already baked in many of the corrections, LLM bubble parallels, past frenzies, things like that. So expect adjustment, not necessarily a collapse. Could be wrong, but I think that's the way it's going to be. Overinvestment in in unpowerable data centers underscores the folly. I think everybody is looking to make way too much of an investment in building these data centers. Not necessarily good for us. I think if we follow through with many of those, and also we don't have the power grid to power them yet. And if we do, it's going to drive up power prices and, real estate prices in areas where you're going to end up affecting the people. You're not going to affect the businesses. So this cycle repeats. Recall Gen AI over promises. And, hit quantum or next, to get us to the next level. And I think that's what we have to be wary of. Be suspicious of what this stuff actually does versus what's being said. And that difference is going to be the correction that we're going to see when the bubble bursts. So AI tech deception, lying, stems from revenue disruption, intentional insiders, underwriting amplifiers, validated by failed predictions and layoff regrets. So, counter this by trusting your gut, extracting niche value, and prepping for measured market resets. And I think that's my best advice right now. Be skeptical out there. Ask questions, even though it's not cool to ask questions in many of these meetings about the use of this technology and what it can do. And if it sounds too good to be true, and if it sounds like you're making sweeping changes that should scare the hell out of you, just because in many cases, those people who are making those decisions are making those decisions based on information that they heard from somebody else that turns out not to be true. And so that's going to cause a huge catastrophe in your company. And I'm not as concerned about the company as I'm concerned about the people who are actually getting hurt by this silly stuff. And I run into it every week. I talk to people every week about this, trying to normalize understanding and trying to teach people what this technology can do. Also, more importantly, what it can't do. That becomes the key issue. Well, anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also, check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100 plus LinkedIn learning courses, and of course, my generative AI architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest books, Unlocking the Power of Cloud and An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. The magical YouTube algorithm thinks that this is another one of my videos that you should watch next. Take care, guys.